Montana Territory, 1883. The wind blew sharp and cold across the train platform in Miles City, lifting the hem of Juliana Everhart's dress and carrying with it the thick hush of judgment. She stepped down from the last car, clutching her carpetbag like it might shield her. The station master glanced her way and tipped his hat, but his eyes narrowed the moment she opened her mouth. "Excuse me, sir, could you point me toward the boarding house?" she asked, her voice honey-rich and unmistakably foreign. His face tightened. "That way," he said curtly, shifting his toothpick to the other side of his mouth and jerking his thumb without looking her in the eye. Juliana's heart sank. She had crossed an ocean and 2 continents to be here, a mail-order bride promised to a rancher named Thomas Hale. His letters had been warm, respectful. He had known she was raised in the south of France, had even written he found the idea charming. But the moment he heard her voice in person, just minutes ago, his smile had vanished. "I thought it would be less thick," he had said, eyes darting around the platform as if someone might see him standing with her. "It's not what I pictured, I'm sorry." Then he had walked away, left her standing in the dust, her letter still tucked in her gloved hand. Now her boots crunched over gravel as she headed toward town, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. She had no idea where to go, no money to return home, no home to return to. "Ma'am," a voice called out behind her. She turned, brushing a strand of hair from her face. A man on horseback was easing his way toward her, tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low but not enough to hide his sharp eyes. His coat was worn but clean, his horse steady and calm beneath him. He looked to be about 30, maybe a year or 2 older. His jaw was strong, dusted with stubble, and his voice had a low, kind rhythm to it. "You look lost," he said gently. Juliana hesitated. "I am, a little." She tried to keep her voice even. "I was supposed to meet someone, let me guess." Man in a brown coat, thinning hair, looked like he was in a hurry to get away, the cowboy asked. She blinked. "Yes," he sighed. "Saw him ride off like the devil was behind him, left you behind." Her throat tightened. She only nodded. He dismounted in one smooth motion, tying his horse to a hitching post. "I am Isaiah Colter," he said, extending a hand. She took it. His grip was steady, warm. "Juliana Everhart." "Nice to meet you, Miss Everhart," he said, then paused. "You speak beautifully." She stared at him, unsure she had heard correctly. He smiled, more with his eyes than his mouth. "Your voice, it sounds like home." Juliana's brow furrowed. "But you are American?" "I had a teacher once, when I was a boy," Isaiah said quietly. "She came from Lyon. Taught me how to read." She had a voice like yours, kind, patient, made everything sound safer than it was. Juliana's lips parted, but she had no words. He cleared his throat. "You have anywhere to stay?" "No," her voice cracked. "I do not know what to do." Isaiah looked toward the street, then back at her. "I have a ranch about 10 miles out. Not much, but I have a spare room. I also have 2 little ones, my sister's children. They need someone who can read to them. Cook, maybe teach them. You could stay as long as you want." "You do not even know me," she whispered. "I do not need to," he said. "You came all this way for a life. I can offer you one, if you want it." Juliana stared at him. Behind the dust and the rough coat, there was something steady in him. Something that did not flinch at her voice or her presence. She nodded slowly. "Yes, please." Isaiah helped her onto the horse, then swung up behind her. She leaned forward, gripping the horn of the saddle, the warmth of him behind her a strange but welcome comfort. They rode in silence as the land stretched wide around them, golden and raw. By the time they reached his ranch, the sun had dropped low, painting the hills in amber and rose. The house was small but sturdy, made of pine and stone, with smoke curling from the chimney. 2 children came running from the front porch, a boy and girl, both with dark hair and curious eyes. "James, Josie," Isaiah called out. "This is Miss Everhart. She will be staying with us." James, who looked to be around 8, nodded solemnly. Josie, younger by a year or 2, clutched a worn doll and said, "Did you come from far away?" Juliana knelt in front of her. "Very far, but I am happy to be here." Josie smiled and took her hand. Inside, Juliana helped prepare supper, unfamiliar with the stove but learning quick under Isaiah's quiet guidance. That night, after the children were asleep, she stepped out onto the porch. Isaiah stood there, looking up at the stars. "Thank you," she said softly. "For not turning away." He looked over at her. You came all this way to be someone's wife. I cannot promise anything like that, not yet, but I can promise safety, respect. She nodded. That is more than I had this morning. He turned toward her, his eyes searching hers. You are not what I expected either. Juliana's heart skipped. You are more, he said. She looked away, heat rising in her cheeks, but he did not press her. Just stood beside her, watching the sky, and for the first time since stepping off that train, Juliana felt still. Not because of what she had lost, but because of what might be starting. The morning rose slow and pale, a thin frost silvering the grass beyond the corral. Juliana woke in a narrow bed with a thick quilt tucked to her chin, the walls of the small bedroom lit with soft gray light. She sat up slowly, her arms stiff from the ride the day before, and her thoughts heavy with the memory of her arrival. But the sound of children's laughter from somewhere beyond the door pulled her gently into the present. She dressed quickly, the fabric of her borrowed cotton dress coarse but clean. In the kitchen, Isaiah was crouched by the stove, stirring something in a pot. Josie sat at the table drawing crooked shapes in the condensation on the window pane, while James traced the edges of a tattered book with a solemn focus. You sleep all right? Isaiah asked without turning. Well enough, she answered, stepping closer. The night is colder here than I am used to, he offered a quiet nod. Winter comes early in these parts. I'll bring an extra quilt from the attic. Juliana reached for the tin cups on the shelf, unsure if she was overstepping. When he said nothing, she moved to set the table. Josie beamed up at her. You gonna read us stories? The girl asked. If your uncle wishes it, Juliana said carefully. Isaiah looked over his shoulder. They haven't heard a story read out loud in a long time. I would be glad to, she said, her voice steady. After the meal, Isaiah saddled his horse and hitched the wagon. I need to ride to the south fence, had some rails go down again. You all right here with them? Yes, she said, lifting the kettle to pour water into the basin. We will be fine. He paused, one hand on the doorframe. If the wind picks up, keep the shutters tight. And if anyone rides up you don't recognize, keep inside and wait for me. I understand, monsieur. His eyes flicked up at that word, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, or the start of something harder to name. Once he left, the house settled into a rhythm. Juliana washed the dishes, then sat with the children near the hearth, reading from James's book. Her French accent softened as she moved through the English words, careful and slow, but the children listened with quiet wonder, leaning in close. When Josie dozed off curled beside her, James looked up. Are you gonna stay? I do not yet know, Juliana answered truthfully. My ma used to sing like you talk, he said, before she got sick. Juliana's chest tightened. She must have had a beautiful voice. He nodded solemnly and turned his eyes back to the fire. Later, while the children napped, Juliana stepped out back to shake the laundry and hang it on the line. The snow hadn't yet come, but the air bit at her fingers and the wind tugged at the pins. She worked quickly, the sun low behind the hills. A hawk circled high above the cottonwoods to the west. She turned when she heard hooves crunch the gravel. Isaiah rode in slow, his coat dusted with dry grass and his face drawn with fatigue. Fence is patched, he said, dismounting. Found tracks nearby. Could be elk or maybe someone passing through. She met his eyes. Do you worry often for trouble? Only when I have something worth guarding, he said. Then, quietly, you kept the children safe, thank you. She looked down at her hands. They are easy to love. He led the horse into the barn, and she followed without thinking. Inside, the air smelled of hay and leather. She held the lantern while he brushed the gelding's flank, moving with the familiarity of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Your sister, she said after a moment. Was she older? By 2 years, he replied, his voice low. She married young. Her husband died in a cattle stampede 3 winters back. She followed a few months later. Fever took her fast. Juliana held the lantern a little higher. And you took in the children. They're all I've got left of her, he said. I didn't know if I could raise them right, still don't, but I try. She watched him for a long moment. You are doing more than trying. He looked at her then, fully, and something settled in the space between them, unspoken, but solid. Back inside, the fire had burned low. She stirred the coals while he sat and pulled off his boots with a tired grunt. I'll head into town tomorrow, he said. Need salt, flour, if you wish you could come, pick anything you need. I would like that, she said. He nodded, then added, there's a church gathering tomorrow evening. Folks bring food, talk a bit, been a while since I went, thought maybe the children'd like it. She hesitated. Do you think they will welcome me? He leaned back, eyes thoughtful. They might not know what to make of you, but they'll see soon enough who you are. Juliana folded her hands in her lap, warmed by more than the fire. Then I will come. Isaiah gave a small, tired smile. Good. He didn't say more, and he didn't need to. The quiet between them wasn't empty, it was beginning. Juliana adjusted her shawl as the wagon rolled through the narrow lane leading into town, the late afternoon light filtering through the bare branches above. Josie sat beside her, legs swinging while James rode up front with Isaiah, his small hands gripping the edge of the bench. The cold had softened since morning, but a breath of winter still lingered in the air. As they passed the livery stable, Isaiah slowed the team. We'll stop here first, he said over his shoulder. Need to ask after a part I ordered for the cedar. He stepped down, lifting James with one arm and offering his hand to Juliana before she could reach for the rail. She hesitated, then accepted, her boots crunching softly against the packed dirt. Inside, the stable smelled of sweet hay and oiled leather. The man behind the counter, older with a sun-split face and a crooked shoulder, looked up from his ledger. Colter, he greeted, then glanced at Juliana. That your new house help? Isaiah didn't look away from the man as he replied. That's Miss Everhart. She's staying with us. The stableman raised a brow but said nothing more, returning to his notes. Juliana caught the flicker of Isaiah's jaw, the way his stance hardened slightly before he resumed his usual calm. Outside, she waited near the wagon while the children chatted quietly about the gathering ahead. Isaiah returned with a wrapped bundle tucked beneath his arm. Next stops the mercantile, he said, setting the package in the back. You come in with me. She nodded and followed him through the wide doors of the general store. The air inside was warmer, with the scent of soap, spices, and flour hanging thick. A young woman behind the counter glanced up and offered a polite smile. Her hair was pinned with care, her dress pressed and fine. Isaiah greeted the clerk and began listing what he needed. Juliana moved toward the shelves, eyes scanning the good spools of thread, tins of coffee, bolts of calico fabric. The clerk approached her after a moment. You're not from around here, she observed. Where did you come from? Juliana turned. From France, by way of New York. The woman nodded slowly. We don't get many from so far. Juliana offered a small smile. It is different here. You'll find folks set in their ways, the clerk said, her voice low. But not all of us are blind to good manners when we see them. Isaiah returned then, arms full. You ready? He asked. Juliana nodded again, and they stepped out into the cooling light. The church hall sat on the edge of town, a white clapboard building with narrow windows and a wide porch. Families were already gathering, tying up horses and carrying crockery wrapped in towels. Isaiah carried a pot of beans in one hand, Josie in the other. Juliana followed, her hands empty but her chest full of nerves that fluttered like wings beneath her ribs. Inside, the hall smelled of bread and roasted meat. Long tables had been arranged with patchwork cloths, and children darted between skirts and boots. Isaiah set the pot down on a sideboard, then turned to her. You don't have to stay if it's too much, he said quietly. I am not afraid, she replied, lifting her chin. He gave a subtle nod, then offered her his arm. She hesitated, then slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow. The room quieted a little as they walked in, just enough to be felt. But it passed. Within minutes, Josie was tugged toward a girl her age, and James found a boy with a carved wooden horse. Isaiah introduced Juliana to a man with a preacher's collar and a woman with flour on her sleeve. She kept her words few, her posture straight. None asked her why she was here. None needed to. The way Isaiah stood beside her, not in front, not behind it, answered for them. Later, while the children played near the stove and the grown folk gathered in clusters with pie plates in hand, Isaiah brought her a mug of cider. You held your own, he said. Wasn't sure how they'd take to you. They do not frighten me, she said softly. The quiet is worse than the words. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. You think I'm quiet. You are, she said, but it is not empty, it is. Listening. He studied her for a long moment. You see more than most. I hear more than most, she corrected, touching her throat lightly. People speak to me with their silence. Isaiah stepped closer, just enough that the warmth of him pressed into the cold between them. I meant what I said that first day, he said. Your voice, it carries something I thought I lost. Juliana kept her eyes on her mug. You lost many things, he nodded once. But not everything. She looked up. He didn't touch her, didn't rush, just stood there, steady as the land outside the window. When the night deepened and the stars came out, they rode back to the ranch with the children asleep between them. The lantern swung low from the wagon's post, casting soft gold along the road ahead. Juliana leaned back against the seat, not from fatigue, but because she could. Isaiah drove with one hand on the reins, the other resting near enough that if she needed to reach out, he would be there. She didn't speak. Neither did he, but they were not quiet, not to each other. The first snow came mid-morning, soft and slow, creeping down from the mountains and settling over the prairie like a hush. Juliana stood at the window, watching it drift past the glass, her hands warm from the bread she'd just pulled from the oven. Outside, the corral was quiet, the horses still, their breath silvering the air. Behind her, Isaiah's boots crossed the wood floor. He paused, then pointed toward the loaves cooling on the table. You've got the touch, he said. That's better than any bread I've had since my mother passed. Juliana turned from the window. Then she must have taught you the taste for it, he nodded once. She had strong hands, worked the dough like it owed her something. His voice was low. She died the year I turned 16. Fever took her in the spring. We buried her under the cottonwood near the creek. Juliana stepped closer. You speak of her with weight. She didn't have much, but she gave everything she had, he said. Taught me to keep my word. Taught me not to look away when someone needed help. She touched the edge of the table, her fingers brushing a bit of flour. That is how you looked at me, not away. Isaiah watched her for a moment. I don't regret it. The wind shifted outside, brushing the house with a low groan. Juliana moved to the stove and poured hot water into a basin, dipping a cloth and rinsing her hands. I used to walk the vineyards with my uncle, she said, her back to him. He would tell me the vines listened. That if you stood still long enough, you could hear the earth breathe. Isaiah took a step closer. You miss it. I miss the language of it, she said, but not the place, not the people who turned their faces when my father lost everything. He leaned against the edge of the table. You were alone a long time. She turned, drying her hands on her apron. I do not feel that here. Isaiah's eyes met hers. He didn't speak, but something shifted in his posture, less guarded, more certain. The silence between them held. The door creaked open and James burst in, cheeks red from the cold. The traps caught something, he cried. 2 rabbits, maybe 3, Isaiah pulled on his coat. You up for skinning them? James nodded, a grin spreading across his face. I'll be down in a minute, Isaiah said. The boy turned and dashed out again. Juliana stepped aside, watching him gather his gloves and scarf. Come with us next time, he said. Josie's too little, but you'd like the hills. When the snow sticks, it all goes quiet up there. Deer move like ghosts. You can hear your own breath, she smiled faintly. I think I would like that very much. Later, when the sun had dipped behind the ridge and the sky took on the blue of worn linen, Juliana sat by the hearth sewing a patch on Josie's dress while Isaiah brought in wood from the shed. The children played nearby, their voices low. A kettle hummed gently over the fire. Isaiah entered, brushing snow from his shoulders, and set the logs beside the hearth. He stood for a long moment, watching the children, then turned toward her. I've been thinking, he said. About what you might want, I mean after the winter, if you'd still be here. Juliana lowered her needle. Where else would I go? He stepped closer. You came here for a husband, that part's still plain. She met his gaze. Are you asking me to stay as your wife? I'm asking if you'd want to, he said. Not out of gratitude, not because I took you in, but because you belong here with them, with me. The fire cracked softly. Josie giggled in the corner, tracing patterns in the ashpan with a stick. Juliana set the dress aside. You've never asked me to be anything but myself. That is more than I ever hoped for. Isaiah's expression shifted, something slow and sure in it. I'll give you a home. Not a promise of ease, but a place that won't turn you away. She stood, stepping across the room until they were inches apart. Then yes, I will be your wife. He reached for her hand, calloused fingers closing gently around hers. No declaration was needed. The warmth between them, steady and unshaken, said enough. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the earth in silence. Inside, something new took root, quiet, firm, and lasting. The wedding was quiet, held on a wind-stilled morning in early December beneath the cottonwood tree near the creek. The same tree where Isaiah's mother rested, and now, where a new life began. The preacher from town rode out in a wool coat and gloves patched at the thumbs, his Bible clasped beneath his arm. Josie wore a crown of dried meadow flowers tied with twine, and James stood solemn and proud beside her, the buttons of his best shirt slightly mismatched. Juliana's dress had once belonged to Isaiah's sister, a soft blue calico, long-sleeved and modest. She had taken in the sides, hemmed the bottom, and sewn on a row of mother-of-pearl buttons from her own satchel. Her hair was pinned in a simple braid over her shoulder, a ribbon tucked through it that Josie had chosen. The vows were spoken with steady voices, the kind that didn't need grand display to carry weight. When Isaiah said, "I will," his hand didn't tremble. When Juliana answered, "And I," she looked him full in the face, eyes clear. James handed her a small ring Isaiah had carved from elk horn, polished smooth with oil and time. It fit perfectly. Afterward, they shared bread and apple preserves inside the house, the warmth of the fire lapping against the windows. The preacher stayed only long enough to finish his coffee, then tipped his hat and rode off with a quiet blessing. When the children were tucked in and the house had fallen still, Isaiah lit a single candle and placed it on the nightstand in the room that was now theirs. He didn't speak when Juliana entered. He simply reached for her hand and she came to him. There was no urgency, no expectation, only closeness, and the steady rhythm of breath shared in the hush of a winter evening. They undressed slowly, reverently, as if unwrapping a promise. The firelight caught the curve of her shoulder, the line of his jaw, and in that quiet, they became one. In the weeks that followed, the snow deepened, and the rhythms of married life settled in like roots beneath the frost. Juliana taught the children how to knit and showed Josie how to braid with ribbon. Isaiah repaired the roof, sharpened the tools, and brought in firewood stacked high against the wall. He never once asked her to do more than she wished, but she did more anyway because it was hers now too. They spoke in soft voices at night, their hands finding each other beneath the quilt. She told him things she had never shared with anyone about the years after her father's ruin, how she'd lived in a boarding house in Marseille, sewing for pennies, how she'd once traded her last pair of gloves for a train ticket. He listened without pity, and sometimes, when the wind howled hard against the windows, he would tell her about the years before the children came, when he rode fence lines alone and thought he might never speak again without grief catching in his throat. They planted early potatoes when the ground thawed, and Isaiah built her a cold frame bed for herbs. Josie helped her tuck in sprigs of sage and lavender, and James built a scarecrow from old rags and a dented pail. On Sundays, they read aloud from the Bible or the worn book of prairie tales Juliana had begun to translate into French for fun. Isaiah never corrected her accent. He only listened, letting the sound of her voice fill the room like music. One evening in late spring, as they walked along the ridge overlooking the creek, Juliana paused and turned to him. "I never imagined I would belong somewhere again." Isaiah stopped beside her, the sky pale with dusk. "You don't belong just anywhere," he said. "You belong here." "With me," she tilted her chin, "and if I ever forget that," he brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "I'll remind you every day." She leaned into him, and they stood there until the stars came. That summer, she began to sew baby clothes with scraps from her fabric chest, tiny shirts, knitted socks. Isaiah didn't ask. He didn't need to. When she placed his hand over her belly one evening, he simply closed his fingers over hers and whispered, "We'll be ready." Their daughter was born the following March during the first thaw. They named her Elise. She arrived quietly, eyes wide, fists curled like buds. Josie sat beside Juliana afterward, cradling her new sister with the fierce devotion of someone who had waited a long time to be needed in a new way. James carved a rattle from pine and gave it to her, wrapped in a scrap of flannel. Isaiah held Juliana close that night. Elise nestled between them and said nothing. He didn't have to. Years passed. The ranch grew slowly. One more cow, a second milk goat, a henhouse Isaiah built with James. The children learned to ride and read and plant. Juliana's herbs grew thick beneath the window. Elise took her first steps in the shade of the cottonwood, her brother's hand steadying her as she walked. Isaiah loved her with the kind of care that didn't need to be spoken daily. It was in the way he lifted the water bucket, the way he waited for her to finish a thought, the way he always left the porch lamp lit when she walked into town. Juliana loved him not for saving her, but because he never once tried to change who she was. He had seen her grief, her scarred pride, and had met it with his own, and together they had made something whole. And when the world turned again, and the wind blew cold across the hills, it found a house where firelight flickered in the windows and laughter spilled from the kitchen. Where a man and a woman sat close at the table, with children gathered around and a quiet kind of joy that did not shout, but stayed. Always.